clean. Welcome to the Gregarious Mammal Podcast. I am Chris.
And I'm Cate.
And we are a pair of tech writers, tech journalists, tech people who like to explain tech to people, be those other tech people or not. We are over in, today, sunny Berlin. It is now nearly September and we're hoping summer has finally begun.
Yes.
But we are not here to talk about the weather. We are here to talk about technology, society, and the impact of both on each other. So, Cate, I think you have today's first article.
Yeah, this one's from the The Atlantic, and the title is When Silicon Valley Took Over Journalism. You might have come across it a few weeks ago. Basically, it's about the publication New Republic, and what happened there is Chris Hughes came on board, an ex-Facebook guru and
co-founder.
Sorry, I do stand corrected. Co-founder.
Well, I like the fact it says at Harvard he had roomed with Mark Zuckerberg, which I don't know if that implies that anyone who ever roomed with him was a founder of Facebook, but anyway.
Yeah, is that a claim to fame? I don't know. But yeah, look, basically it talks about a print publication that's got to keep up with the times and go onto the internet. If you read it, it kind of suggests that the Hughes became rather seduced by the metrics of BuzzFeed, where, they base it on the clickbaits and the seductive headings of, you wouldn't believe what happened next, and that kind of stuff. And the idea of, how do we fix this problem of getting traffic. And he also became quite invested in Upworthy, a site you might know that basically picks videos and graphs from the web and tries to make them go viral. So he was basing kind of the journalism or, the knowledge kind of basis on these kind of entertainment metrics. And look, any of us would know that it's very difficult some days to tell between what's infotainment and what's entertainment. It's really quite a sad article, and I'd encourage people that have any interest in journalism to read it, because it shows, a publication that's desperately trying to stay relevant in an increasingly crowded marketplace. They're relying on metrics that are usually for videos and graphics, and they put money into it. This guy that wrote the article becomes an editor. He's given carte blanche to employ lots of people, so they get this kind of thing going, and then it just kind of, it's almost like the dream changes.
It actually feels like a movie because initially Chris Hughes he's a self-made man. He has money to burn, really, and he actually says, "Oh, do what you like. I don't care. I'm not going to be involved." And then slowly becomes more and more involved. And actually, I think the writer was the editor.
Yeah, Franklin Foer.
I don't think he became the editor. I think he was the editor to begin with.
He was. No, I think he was poached from somewhere. Okay. Franklin Foer.
And then it just like it's that, like in a movie where you feel like everything's going great, and you come into work the next day and suddenly someone else has your job, and it's like, what happened?
Yeah.
And it feels a bit like a movie. It's very strange. And even why? I actually find it interesting. I have read a couple of articles this week. I think a lot of people say that Trump is the culmination of this kind of era of journalism, which is ironic because he does nothing but criticize journalists. But also, prior to Trump, I find it somewhat comical and ironic that people say the step just before Trump was Cecil the Lion, and that every news outlet just got so obsessed with covering this particular story that they just invented all these strange headlines just to get people to click. And now it's similar with Trump, and yet he's not a lion who just was shot in the jungle. He's the president.
It's actually an interesting analogy because you do see it in the media now. Like whenever, unfortunately, there's any type of attack in a public space that may or may not be terrorism, depending on what stage you are in the news cycle. Because we've got that 24-hour cycle, you've got people constantly trying to stay relevant with updates, with, witnesses. Every newspaper is asking people to contact them and email them. And have you got photos? Have you got this? Were you there? Tell us your story. So you've got it from every possible angle, almost picked dry. And it may be before you even find out the actual facts of the case.
And I'd like to end with the final paragraph, actually, of this article, which I think is possibly the most powerful. And I will say, so it's written by Franklin Foer,
Yep.
I'm not sure how to pronounce that. My assumption is to try and pronounce it a German way.
Yeah.
Forthcoming book, World Without Mind, The Existential Threat of Big Tech. I mean, there's a lot of people who are possibly overcritical of tech sometimes. But anyway, I'd just like to read you a couple of paraphrasing of the last paragraph. Journalism has performed so admirably in the aftermath of Trump's victory that it has grown hard to see the profession's underlying rot. Now, each assignment is subjected to a cost-benefit analysis. Will the article earn enough traffic to justify the investment? Sometimes the analysis is explicit and conscious, though in most cases it's subconscious and embedded in euphemism. Either way, it's this train of thought that leads to editors to declare an idea not worth the effort or to worry about whether an article will sink. Now, I think in a very nice segue from that to the next topic, where we're talking about the cost effectiveness of an article. What is one way that things could become more cost effective, Kate?
One way, arguably, is robotics. Depending on who you read. I mean, personally, this is an article a bit close to my heart. I do have my own biases to come in and say that straight away, because I have written quite a lot about Pepper Robot, one of SoftBank's particular robots. I'm often more a fan of their Neo robot, but hey, it's this is an article from Wired about robots will not take your job.
And I would just like to, before you go any further, I would like to interject to say there have been lots of articles on this subject.
Correct.
But to me, this was one of the best written and best researched and most balanced I think I've read on the subject, which is why we've highlighted it.
Yeah, it basically looks at some really interesting analogies. For example, it looks at the impact of the ATM or the cash machine on the argument that was going to change human labour, obviously by changing the bank branches, the opening hours, the number of staff in banks. And the predictions at the moment, if we actually read it out, I'll read this little bit out, it might be easiest than me trying to mumble through figures. Today there are more than 400,000 ATMs in the US, but as economist James Besson has shown, the number of bank tellers actually rose between 2000 and 2010. That's because even though the average number of tellers per branch fell, ATMs make it cheaper to open branches, so banks opened more of them. True, the Department of Labour does predict that the number of tellers will decline by 8% over the next decade. But that's 8%, not 50%, which was what was predicted earlier in the article.
And I think this ties very nicely in with this period of history we've been going through, of the usual blaming of job losses, especially in the US. I mean, this is generally, I guess, being an English-speaking world, we tend to have a lot of news from the US. Between 2000 and 2009, and kind of around the global financial crisis, and then the fallout from that, assuming it's automation, and actually a lot of the time it's not, it's outsourcing. And again, it seems to be a thread already running here. Trump is a natural kind of conclusion of this conversation. But yeah, we could possibly have an entire episode to talk about this article. I think it's very
Absolutely.
good because it isn't just scaremongering. It actually goes into some very good facts and figures, and generally follows, possibly why I liked it, is because it generally follows my opinion on this subject, which is that in any great upheaval of technology or job style, yes, there has been a short-term period of adjustment, but in the long term, new jobs come to replace those jobs and things like that. And I guess I would possibly say, I don't think this is mentioned in the article, but we've discussed this ourselves, is saying that possibly people of our age, kind of nearing middle age and onwards, will be the ones who probably suffer the most, and our children will probably benefit from all of that. And in the relative scheme of things, that's a short period of time, but that's possibly the realism of it. Or maybe now the criticism or the comment would be that the world moves so quickly that longish short-term change will be shorter this time. We shall see, of course. And actually, Kate, I mean, this whole article really brings about something that we like to discuss, and maybe you'd like to tell the listeners something they'll be able to listen to in the future around this.
Oh, yeah. This is a funny one. For D-Zone, a publication Chris and I both write for, we're going to be doing a Smackdown. The full details of this we haven't entirely ironed out yet, but basically Chris and I will be doing a little bit of a debate on will robots or will AI take our jobs? And we both have pretty passionate opinions on this, on different facets of it, on the facts of it, on the figures, on the reality, on looking at it from an international perspective rather than focusing on America, for example. So this will be something to look forward to, and I know we're very much looking forward to it, and we will be certainly keeping you posted.
Although I get the feeling that we're not going to disagree as much as we could for a SmackDown.
Yeah,
but anyway.
I think we'll probably be disagreeing
on Minutai.
More on the particulars. Like, I'm more into the cobots than robots, and I still believe that chatbots are probably going to take more jobs than an actual robot would.
Okay, now finally in this little segment, Kate, you have a third article that sort of relates, and I've actually got some other anecdotes I'd like to feed into this, but tell us what this article is.
Yeah, this is one that I came across in The Guardian, and it's, bear in mind, it's not something I have any personal experience with, but the title is They Could Destroy the Album, How Spotify's Playlists Have Changed Music Forever. So they're basically looking at the way that we listen to music. And I'd be really interested to hear from the listeners the last time anyone bought a CD. Because I can't remember the last time I bought a CD. It would be obviously before I moved countries. So it probably around maybe 8 years or so, probably more. A long time. So, the article goes into that a lot of us are listening to our music online. We're listening to curated playlists that come up on the music platforms, whether it's Spotify or it's one of the other ones. And it contends that it actually, makes some music massively popular on the strength of a single song. Well, a number of the artists they've mentioned in the article are actually saying they're questioning whether to release albums at all. They're talking about releasing single songs. They're talking about releasing, live or different.
I'd like to address that from a creative perspective.
Yeah, sure.
And then I'd like to input on the financial aspect, actually.
Yep.
So the creative aspect is there have been some artists who have been successful on streaming services, but yes, they do tend to focus on the single tracks.
Correct.
And this is interesting because this suits certain types of music better than others. You focus more on the delivery and the build-up of a certain track than an album. The album has typically been this kind of longer chunk of material where you can play with themes and intertwining threads and things like that. And some of the classic albums have been, I don't want to necessarily use the term concept albums because that kind of implies something loftier or more pretentious, but albums that have a commonality to them, a band at a particular point in their career, a particular sound, etc., etc. And if all you're ever doing is releasing individual tracks, this doesn't necessarily give you that ability to hear that in a cohesive whole. Of course, if you're releasing one track every couple of weeks, then that's another thing. And I think this is one interesting point to make on the creative side, is the artists who have made the streaming services work for them are working in this new model. And often the ones that criticize it are ones who are more used to the traditional model. Just as you scroll past the first paragraph, there's a link to a related article saying, music streaming hailed as industry's saviour as labels enjoy profit surge. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to as labels enjoy profit surge in that sentence there, because the way that traditionally, and having signed a record contract myself in the early 2000s, which still had a clause in it for losses due to vinyl breakages, and actually bear in mind this was at a time when vinyl wasn't experiencing its renaissance it is now, and even then I would still argue it's only a small percentage. I would say that most artists, even if they are making a lot of sales through streaming services, are still signing contracts that don't reflect that. So really, I think this has been one of the major criticisms of streaming services, is whilst they did and do provide a lot of potential for artists to make money in different ways, the labels have sewn them up already, and there's no way for them to take advantage of that. I'd like to bring in one more little anecdote, and then I throw it back to you, Kate, because I read this morning. It was a bit of a mixed bag article, but I can't even remember exactly what the point of it was, but there was one particular line in it that interested me and is related to this. I can't remember what role they played, but one of the members of the band from the 70s, slightly confusing, but that was the name of the band, and he was making a reasonable amount of money each year, not a millionaire, but a reasonable amount of money each year out of royalties. And I can say this from my own small experience. I've seen the same pattern, but the quantities are vastly different. And then as soon as streaming services happened, he stopped making this level of money anymore. And it actually got to the point where he got a serious form of cancer and couldn't afford the treatment and had to crowdfund amongst his old fans to get the money to pay for the treatment. And it was kind of an interesting reflection on, especially for the older artists, bearing in mind older artists are living longer.
Yeah, that's true.
The sort of impact of that. Anyway, yeah, it was an interesting perspective, but I'll throw it back to you now, Kate. Sorry, I just wanted to get a couple of those things in there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's got kind of a few different points in the articles, and it's, I mean, it's kind of funny because reading through it, I've not heard of most of the artists mentioned.
Well, this is
because there's a lot of kind of international acts. There's a lot of dance music, stuff like that I don't really listen to. But a couple of interesting points it makes is that, firstly, there's a level of manipulation, and I don't mean this in a nefarious way, in getting almost like A/B testing. Like, for example, you can put songs in different order to see what people like most. Do they go to the first song? Do they skip songs? That kind of thing. And it also really pushes this idea that you can find, the unknown through Spotify that will become this massive hit. And it does kind of caution this a little bit. For example, it says, I'll just read this short paragraph. But while Spotify may be shaping the way music reaches us, ultimately the listener still has choice. And that power is built into the service's architecture. Spotify watches which tracks get skipped, and those with high skip rates will be unceremoniously binned for stinking up its playlists. The onus therefore remains mostly on artists and labels to whip up momentum. There's a massive difference between being added to a playlist and what you get out of it, Hemmings says. We have seen it with acts of ours who have been added to playlists with 250,000 followers, and it's led to 56 streams.
And I think this, it kind of shows that creative industries across the board are also becoming as data-driven as the companies that the platforms create the platforms they use, and will become similar to making a podcast, like you release a track a week or something like that. And actually, one thing people forget, people have very short memories for history, is that in the kind of nascent days of pop music in the 60s, bands actually released albums very, very regularly. And this was often because the medium that they were out on were a lot shorter. 45 vinyl didn't provide much time. So albums, actually, sometimes bands were putting out 2 albums a year. So it's not necessarily that new for an artist to produce more content more regularly. But we will see. And I think it favours, as I said, certain genres over others. Anyway, I don't want to get too elitist here about talking about different forms of music. So maybe we'll wrap up this little segment and move on to our next series of articles.
And we're back here on Gregarious Mammal. This is Kate joining you from sunny Berlin. We've got a couple of articles to discuss now, which are a bit of a foray into the past. The first one is from ZDNet, how these communist-era Apple II clones help shape Central Europe's IT sector.
Now, I love this for a variety of reasons. This is one of my links. I mean, firstly, anyone who's listened to the podcast for a little while knows I have been very, very slowly, and it's on a bit of a pause right now, working on a board game that actually is about computer history. But also, as I like this especially for one other reason, that years and years ago, my first ever kind of job in the computer sector was working with a guy from Hungary who told me he actually worked for a period of time in the USSR making these clones, actually, and often they were made out of wood, which is kind of interesting.
I've seen them, yeah.
And also the Computer Museum here in Berlin has some of these.
That's where
and
I've
I always
seen them.
found it was something I wanted to do with the game eventually, of having an expansion for some of these old obscure computers to the west. And the thing I find interesting is, of course, a lot of the people who made these, and also their children, I guess, we now find a lot working in Western companies. And anyone who's ever worked with a lot of programmers from the Eastern European countries knows that a lot of them are very good. Like, it's not like, because I think there's always this interesting thing that necessity sometimes is the mother of all invention, that when you are kind of living in an isolatory place and you need to find your own ways of doing things, sometimes you come up with better ideas, actually. I find it quite fascinating. So some of these machines in the 80s from especially Bulgaria and Romania were direct clones of Western machines like Apple's, Acorns, IBM's, Commodores, things like that. And some were their own sort of ideas on these as well. Some were completely original. And they were usually very solid and probably still work. Any thoughts on this, Kate?
Yeah, I mean, I would be really interested to actually see one of them operating because I've only seen... You
can see them in the museum, actually. Yeah.
I've seen them in the museum, but I've not seen them running, you know. I've seen them as they are, you know, as a model. But I'd be interested to see also what kind of permutations the hacker community could make with them because they're actually... You know, they've got some pretty good tech inside them, so it's definitely worth pulling them apart and seeing what we can do, yeah.
And some of the things were interesting. Like I remember we often had machines in those days in the West that connected to TVs because they were common, but in these cases they connected to TVs because monitors were so expensive. It wasn't necessarily a choice. It was just there was no choice. They had to be able to work with TVs. Yeah, and then some of them, I think, was this model in particular? Where is it? The Bulgarian Pravet 16 series was one of the first 16-bit architected machines, and most of them were compatible. The HC computer, which stood for home computer, coming out of Romania, which was unexpected because it was actually using English in its product name, which was unusual. Yeah, and I guess I would be... And then, yeah, and actually it does... there's another computer museum in Germany where they have some of these. Not the one we've been talking about, but a different one. And I guess it all sort of starts to stop when the wall comes down. And a lot of these people now are in different places. And true. Some of these... So it actually says... Apple and Sinclair replicas help build the software industries in Bulgaria and Romania, which currently employ about 150,000 in total, most of them working for Western companies. Ironically, a lot of the people that started copying these companies are now working for some of them.
Yeah,
which is not
true.
that unusual, but yeah.
It's actually, you know, a slight side note, but when Chris mentioned his board game, and we'll put a little link to that in our show notes, but I was doing some research into potential places for launches and things like that, like you do when you're planning something, and was looking literally around the world at all the different computer museums, and it's everything from your big kind of gold star English museum to pretty much someone's backyard shed. Absolutely fascinating. So it's definitely something to do a little bit of Googling in your own area and seeing what kind of museums there are.
And the second one for me in this segment is possibly on a topic that is up there in the top 10 oldest desires in human history, and that is of immortality. Now, I have my own personal opinion on immortality. I don't actually think I'd want to be immortal because life would get boring, to be honest with you. Even ignoring all the constraints of having immortal people everywhere. I don't know. But anyway, but it has been a desire that is constantly existed for a long time. In fact, this article at the top of it has a picture from Lucas Cranach, who's actually from not too far from Berlin.
Oh, yeah?
Fountain of Youth in 1546. A Fountain of Youth, the Holy Grail, all these sorts of things are nothing new. And, of course, when we have a lot of slightly eccentric people in control of a lot of expensive technology, what is likely to happen? Well, what is likely to happen is...
What could go wrong?
Well, not what could go wrong, but what's a logical kind of conclusion. And now... I think we've covered previously about the singularity, the sort of merging of human and technology. And one aspect of that is instead of it being a merging, like slowly supplementing your body with electrics, kind of the other way around, like uploading your brain
uploading,
into a computer. And this article is mostly about that.
I actually, when I saw this on our list, I did a little bit of picking just quickly. Then you might have, hopefully you didn't hear me clicking, an article I wrote last year for NextPack on disrupting your brain. looking at some of this stuff. I've got a couple of points to make on the article. Firstly, originally it talks a bit about cryogenics and cryotherapy, and probably more cryogenics. What's the word? Sorry, I'm having a mental blank. The word where you go and get frozen. Cryopreservation. Thank you.
It's cryogenics, the same thing.
Cryogenics. Right, it's the same thing. Okay. I always mix it up with the medical treatment where you go sit in a cold room, because that's cryo something as well. Anyway, it's...
How long were you in that room for?
I've never done it.
Okay.
I just watched it on video. But I'm always a little skeptical of cryogenics for one very good reason, or I think it's a good reason, is you're basically signing away your remains or your loved one's remains with a very large amount of money to a company, and you're hoping that company is never going to go bust, never going to have a fire, never going to have the founders dying, or something go wrong, because they've got all these bodies sitting there.
To be fair, unless it was an open source alternative, uploading your brain to a machine is the same problem.
True. It's a very good point.
Yeah.
There's actually. I'm not a neurologist or anything like that, but I have been following the idea of doing tech and brains for a while. Everything from wearable tech, things you wear that enhance your cognitive functioning in athletics, to neural implants for people with very serious mental illness or neurological disorders like dementia or perhaps seizures, things like that. And one that kind of relates to the article is Kernel, which was founded. The guy that started that was Brian Johnson, who did Braintree. You might know Braintree. He actually kicked in 100 million last year to Kernel, with the idea of being able to create a tiny chip that can be implanted in the brain to help people suffering from neurological damage caused by strokes and things like that. The hope is it'll be able to boost intelligence, memory, and other cognitive tasks. And this is kind of his question. He says, if we can record and stimulate neural activity with high resolution anywhere in the brain, can we learn the language of the neural code and make it programmable? If we can communicate directly with the neural substrates of perception, memory, and decision-making, what frontiers will emerge from our explorations of an imagination? So when we get onto the kind of the brain uploading stuff, we are super early with some of this tech. I mean, I read stuff now and people are going, what about if someone steals my brain hard drive, or however you want to put that?
Well, the company gets taken over.
Yeah. People start getting, it goes to someone that's a negative one. And I think that the place we've maybe seen it best lately was anyone who likes Black Mirror would remember the episode on...
Well, actually, we're going to come back to this again as well.
Yeah.
You're talking about a different episode here, aren't you, I think, actually, but they're similar. Yeah.
Well, there's kind of two it relates to.
Yeah.
There's the...
We're going to come back to one of them later.
Should I not mention it then?
Well, there's two episodes, and I think there's the... Let's say there's the episode earlier in the series. Let's talk about that one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, we can talk about that one. Yeah, that one would be in season 2, episode 4, White Christmas.
Oh, okay. That's not what I thought you were going to talk about, but okay, carry on.
Where and I'm just looking at my notes because I have to... Basically, the character Greta goes for an operation which results in the creation of a digital copy of her consciousness called Cookie, designed to control the smart house and ensure everything is perfect, so she doesn't have to have problems like her toast not being cooked the right way, stuff like that. And then there's a guy called Matt in the episode who creates a virtual body for the copy, puts her in it with nothing but a control panel.
I do not remember this episode at all.
We might have to watch it after this.
I thought you were going to talk about the one
broadcast.
In season 3 where her husband dies and she gets a robot who's programmed with his...
Oh.
That one.
That's a completely different episode.
No, I don't remember this other episode. I thought you were talking about that one.
No.
Because they're both quite similar in some respects.
Well, I mean, I guess listeners, what we're saying is there's so many different ways we could pick apart this stuff. I guess it's funny, like I remember being a small child, and when people thought about, there was always this joke that, you could see people on camera and have a phone call at the same time. And people were always thought it was just this strangest thing because people would be like, what if you got out of the shower and you didn't have any clothes on? You know, it was everyone's favourite, horror at the time in the 80s. But it just seemed so far away. And when Skype came in, like you barely noticed it because it just became so normal, this kind of stuff. So it's fun. And, 80s is what, 20, 30.
I basically base all my
ago.
opinions on video calling from the scenes in Back to the Future 2.
So funny. I mean, we're talking about something maybe 30, 40 years ago. It being sort of, just this idea that wouldn't one day happen. And some of this stuff will very gradually happen. There's a lot of people putting a lot of money into neurology and brain science and every gamut from it, from the implants to the idea of the brain uploading.
Have a read of this article, because we haven't even covered some of the discussions in it on things like security, things like it would probably widen the gap between rich and poor. There's kind of other issues as well. So it's a little bit, it's not a very long article, but it covers lots of different aspects of this conversation. So go and have a look. And I don't know. I don't think I want to be immortal in any way. Well, actually on a computer, I don't know. But it's hard to even imagine what that would mean, how that would look. Like, I mean, if I don't have to eat or sleep because I'm a machine, I don't know. It starts to get really hard to think about.
It kind of once you start reading some of this stuff, there's actually a book I read recently that is based on a podcast that someone else did. I will put the little link in. Where they got people every episode to come and talk about future tech and what they thought the future might be like. And to give a suggestion, say, what is something we need in the future? And I'm still reading the book. I've read about half of it. But it's everything from things where you go, like universal income, you go, yeah, that's good, or changes in the currency, to just things that are so way out and wacky, you're like, what? But it just shows, like, in some ways, the future is really about who's got the money and the power to make it happen, I guess.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth? Anyway, that was a somewhat sobering end to
I'm sorry.
that little chunk. Let's move on to our final little section of articles for this podcast.
So now we're back talking about Estonia, and as some of our listeners will know, we are a bit of a fan kind of thing going with Estonia, having visited there and really been interested in the tech scene. Chris is a e-resident of Estonia, and we've met quite a few of the interesting people involved in the startup scene there. But this first article in this section that Chris wanted to introduce to us is about the idea of est coins or crypto coins for e-residents of Estonia.
Well, for the current country. And this is an article on Medium. This is reported fairly wildly. This was reported fairly wildly.
Yeah.
I can't stop saying wildly.
Widely.
Fairly widely in the tech press, but I am referring to the original article written by Kasper Korges, who I did interview in the past, who is the managing director. Actually, that wasn't his job title when I spoke to him, but anyway, he's in charge of the e-residency program. I mean, I'd actually move to Estonia in a shot if it was a bit bigger. It's my biggest problem with it. I love some of the things they're doing. And, of course, as people always point out to me, they're, I don't know where they got this time from, 75 minutes away from being invaded by Russia. Anyway.
Okay.
Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. In fact, we haven't used our byline that much in this episode, Kate. So, yes, the proposal, this is just a proposal, they're just talking about it. To issue crypto tokens would make the Republic of Estonia the first country with an initial coin offering. ICO, all the rage at the moment. And I say all the rage, and I think some people are sceptical about ICOs, but they have actually been tremendously successful for a lot of people.
Yeah, true.
Anyway, so they talk about est coins managed by the Republic of Estonia, accessed by anyone in the world. Basically a way, and he puts a quote here, which is something that I actually discussed with him in my interview a couple of years ago now, in the very early days of the program. Estonia has just 1.3 million residents. What would happen if our country had 10 million digital residents? And I spoke to him about this actually in the past as well. And I think he's kind of saying that they shouldn't really be allowed to vote because they don't live in the country, but they should have some kind of investment in the country. And this is an interesting way of providing that, actually. In some respects, it's almost like they'd thought about this in the past when I talked to him about this, but didn't really have a solution or a mechanism, and this is one. So it actually enables people vested in the prosperity of the country to invest in the country. I don't. It's a little unclear how this exactly could work.
Yeah.
Like typically,
Agreed.
a coin or a cryptocurrency, say let's take for example, a tech project raises cryptocurrency from. It's actually it's very similar to Kickstarter. So you spend basically money to buy cryptocurrency. To buy pre-access to a platform or a product. That's basically what it is.
That's my understanding too.
So it's similar to Kickstarter in some ways. You're kind of buying to be the first person to have access and have some, and then in this case, some kind of currency in the system. I mean, when you're just getting a product on Kickstarter, it's a bit different. But and so quite exactly what that would buy you in Estonia, I'm not 100% sure. They have been talking for some time about having these services and things, which are coming out slowly, but I haven't found them all to be as appealing as I would hope. And a lot of the third-party solutions that have used the Estonian infrastructure have been so far, which is somewhat disappointing.
That's
but
a shame.
I think the main issue is that Estonia is seen by lots of larger countries as just not big enough to be taken seriously, and a lot of the governments, especially that have been looking at the program, tend to be the smaller emerging ones, much like Estonia.
I mean, I'm always curious with these kind of offerings, and how it doesn't occur that you get some of those large monopoly companies coming in and kind of taking over.
It depends. So when you look at Bitcoin blockchain, there is one method of determining who gets the say.
Okay.
Which is proof of work. But then the other blockchains allow you to define the proof of, whether it be a proof of work or a proof of stake. And a lot of the platforms that have emerged allow you to determine what that is. Okay. It may be, if it was, say, a cryptocurrency for neighborhood planning, it may be that you get more kind of sway in saying how things should go by turning up to meetings.
Right.
Or it may be in pure buying power, or it may be in something else. Like it can be defined.
Right.
So I'm guessing that's the thing. It's a very interesting sort of concept article here, but it's a little unclear about what it would mean. And I guess that is half the point. They just said it's a proposal. It's not. I think the whole point was to get ideas, and they've had a lot of comments and feedback on this.
Yeah, that's true.
They're comparing it to the Norwegian State Pension Fund, which is actually based on the oil revenue
that's right.
in Norway, because Norway gets a lot of money from oil, and they reinvest that back into the pension fund.
Yeah, right.
So everyone sort of benefits from that. So that's possibly one idea. It could be that people buy into the country, and then the physical residents of the country benefit from the digital residents. That could be one way.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Makes sense.
There's a whole bunch of thoughts here, and if you have your own thought about how this could work, I would encourage you to go to the article. And surprising amount of pluses, but like thumbs up or claps, as now Medium is doing, which actually on a side tangent, I think is actually quite a nice idea. But anyway, but only 52 comments. So if you have any comments, jump in and actually add your thoughts about what that could mean. Any other thoughts, Kate, or do you want to move on to our last article?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I've really heavily engaged with, but I would like to learn more. So I'd encourage other people to check it out too. And then we can chat about it together.
That sounds like you didn't read the article, Kate.
No.
All right. Well, in that case, how about we go to a final article, which is one I haven't read and you have. How about that?
This one is actually looking at how science fiction predicts relationships. It's from The Guardian, and it's basically pulling apart a bunch of sci-fi films and TV shows that look at how
actually I did read this article.
Life and love is in the future. So we have everything here, and I've not seen all these TV shows or films, I might add. We have everything from Her to The Lobster to Marjorie Prime Composite. There's, of course, our Black Mirror that we mentioned earlier.
And that episode, but it also refers to one of the latter episodes, the one that won a lot of awards. We don't want to give away any spoilers, but Future of Romance was a fascinating episode, wasn't it?
Which one are you talking
The
about?
Black Mirror episode. Well, actually, both of them.
The one with the robot.
But the one towards the end as well.
I think people... Are you talking about San Junipero?
Yes. That's also in this article. So.
Yeah. But it kind of offers some really interesting ideas about relationships, like how technology could be used to help people deal with grief, for example. Like it's got a couple of different examples from the idea of an AI that can help people go back into their earlier lives and have fun and enjoy themselves when they're, effectively comatized. And conversely, you've got the idea along these themes as well, where someone's partner dies and they're able to order a robot of the that looks like the partner, but is not quite the partner. That is able to mimic their language and so on by uploading all their social media and things like that. Very interesting.
I find it quite interesting because it's mostly positive. The Lobster, it's focusing on new science fiction.
I haven't seen the Lobster.
I'd like to read. It's been on my list for a while. It's hard. I haven't quite managed to figure out where to watch it yet. Most of them are fairly positive, and we're excluding here old science fiction.
Yeah, true.
Things like 1984 or Brave New World, who also have their own predictions on love and take very different approaches. I guess in 1984, it's actually I don't think there is much love, and in Brave New World, it's just for fun. There's no reason to procreate. It's just pure lust, really.
Yeah.
They're both very of their time books, but yeah, I mean, I find it interesting. They're not new ideas per se. It also mentions Ex Machina, which we watched, which was a bit of a weird film, but it had some interesting ideas in it.
Worth a watch.
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you know what?
And I think some of the positives here, I think, are. Metropolis. Actually, it does talk about one old one, Metropolis. Yeah.
There was an article I read recently. It was one of those long read type scenarios, which again I'll link to because I can't remember where it was and who wrote it. Apologies in advance. About someone who created a chatbot of their father just before he died of cancer.
Did they like their father?
Yes.
Would be the
Yes, he did. Basically, what he did was he, in short, he got a very extensive suite of stories that his father had told him verbally, recorded them, and obviously, broke down the words where appropriate so that someone could ask questions that would instigate the bot telling the stories back to you, or coming up with an anecdote, or making a comment that this guy would normally make. And it was very laborious. It was a really laborious task. He involved his whole family. He even played it back to his mother and his father at one point, which was pretty creepy, shall we say. It was quite... it's kind of... I don't know. It gives you this whole idea of this issue of digital legacies as well. Like, how do we want to be remembered? Do we want to be remembered?
That sounds like something we talked about earlier. Yeah.
Does it let you just,
die?
Here
is an interesting question. Who gets consent in this? Like, tying in those two articles.
Yeah.
If you died and I wanted to upload your personality to the cloud, to the love cloud.
Yeah.
Who gets consent in that? You are now immortal.
Yeah.
Did you want to be? Oh.
No, probably not. That's a really good point. Yeah. I mean, that's the issues with all this stuff. Who opts in, who opts out, who decides, who has access to it. There's so much privilege in so much of these conversations.
You know what I think we should do, Kate? Bit of a tangent here. You know what I think we should do?
Yeah.
Reading down this article and looking at some of these films. Some we've seen. Yeah. Some we have seen and not for a long time. Yeah. Some I'd like to see. You know what I think we should do?
Movie festival.
No. Better than that. We should. Well, we should do a side episode where we do some of the classic kind of live narration of some of these films.
Oh yeah, that sounds like fun. Yeah,
they're always fun to do.
I'll just mention quickly because otherwise I'll forget. There is, of course, series 4 of Black Mirror coming out. You can now watch the little preview for that on YouTube. So I encourage you to check that out as well.
All right, let's close up this episode, Kate. Let's close up this episode with talking about what we've been up to and what we're up to. Do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, let's see. I've been doing lots of interviews. I'm just kind of catching up with writing them all down at the moment. The moment I'm working on one with a lovely gentleman called Paul Chin from Virginia, who was working in food trucks and as a chef and those sort of roles. And he went to an event with his food truck. It was a NodeBots day. He was sort of like, oh, this is interesting. Returned the next year with his truck to sell the food, decided to have a go. Fast forward, a couple of years later, he now teaches NodeBots to people and runs workshops and all sorts of stuff. And he's created a little NodeBot that basically is a prayer to Nicolas Cage. So it's a little Nicolas Cage shrine where it allows you to pray to Nicolas Cage each day and records each prayer that you've done. It's actually really. It was a really enjoyable interview, as well as being kind of funny with the Nicolas Cage thing. But I'm always really interested to learn how other people get into tech, as someone myself who didn't go to university and study computer science or something like that. There's often this perception that it's all this very specialist knowledge, and it's you have to be very mathematically minded to be able to access any of these kind of opportunities. And he shows that sometimes going in and learning hands-on, where you have the materials in front of you, you have someone showing you, you have a fairly accessible platform using Node.js and JavaScript and stuff like that, to be able to really learn these things and get competent and confident as well. So it's a really nice interview. I look forward to sharing it with you.
And you also have an article here, I think you're selling yourself slightly short, I've just seen, on the smart lock fiasco.
Oh yeah. This is a bit of a doozy, this one. Basically, people would know a smart lock. The idea is a lock on your door that you operate through, say, your mobile phone, or if you're a bit more advanced, it might be a wearable or an implant if you're very advanced. And there's a company called Lock something. I haven't got it open. Can you click on it and tell me what the company's called? We'll just check that so we don't get sued by a company with a similar name, because there's a few. It is called
Lockstate.
Lockstate. So apologies, Lockwood is not you.
With their remote lock 6i.
Yes, this particular brand, it's marketed through Airbnb to people with remote properties that they rent out. The idea being, you can lock it in with your phone, blah, blah, blah. And basically they did an upgrade and the whole system crashed. So you can no longer lock your door if you have one of these. Now, this is all fine and dandy if you have a physical key, of course, because none of us are suggesting a world where no one has a key. It's about having options, I guess. But given the market, these people may very well not have a key. So you could rock up. You've got the nightmare scenario of rocking up to an Airbnb and you can't get in or out. Or conversely, you've got people with properties that they can't rent out that could be a security risk. And the company was very, a little bit slow acting on this, shall we say, and their options are obviously a replacement bit that you have to put in yourself or a refund. But the biggest problem here is it takes nearly 3 weeks to get these things happening. So if you're relying on having a front door lock, not unreasonable, it's fairly problematic. And I actually, when I published this article, I got a very angry email from the company, from the PR person, saying, well, don't you want us to hear our side of the story? And I said, well, hang on. Firstly, the story, most of it I got from your press release that you did after it. Secondly, you're actually talking to the wrong person, because I'm someone who's a big fan of these kinds of products and have been pushing them for some time. And thirdly, look, I welcome you to tell me your side of the story. Let me know. Let's work on something. Never heard back. Funny, isn't it?
I think this is interesting, the Internet of Things and wider, but especially the Internet of Things. I think it shows that, and it's not the first time we've had the infamous story with the pet feeders as well.
No, that's right.
Is that there needs to be a fallback if the connection goes down.
Correct, exactly.
Somehow. It needs to be able to work offline as well. And this has always been my issue with using, people, why don't you use Google Docs? But it's because I don't always have an internet connection. This is why I actually like using apps sometimes, because I have the ability to work offline. Crazy, I know, but sometimes we're not always online.
And it's funny, I was thinking about it because I interviewed a company, I mentioned them in this article, called 1AIM here in Germany, in Berlin, and they have a kind of a related product, but their difference is they don't use They don't use Wi-Fi. They use the a cellular network as a means to log in because they just say it's unreliable. But it's interesting because sometimes here in Berlin the cellular network isn't all that reliable either. So
we are both on a cheap network, to be fair.
you maybe get a bit stuck with that also. But
all right, let's round up this. I'll quickly whip through some of the things I have written about India Stack. Fascinating. We talked about Estonia earlier and their digital revolution, but they're only 1.2 million people. How about digitizing and disrupting a country of 2 billion people?
Wow.
Now, India Stack has tried to do this. The one thing we found, and I read some other articles explaining the same thing, is it presents with this whole platform. It doesn't really tell you how to use it. But anyway, have a look at the roundup there. And these would have popped up on the podcast. I talked to Pepper Data and Datical, kind of both companies trying to bring DevOps practices to different fields. My article on a course roundup of computer science courses where I interviewed lots of ex-students of various online and offline computer science course providers and got their opinions is now published. And finally, another one of my kind of out there Think PC articles that, not Think PC, but sort of trying to define a new way of doing things that I've been working on for a little while is published, which is a bit technical, but tools and practices for documenting microservices. Something that came up in some meetups here a few times, and I thought it was time I got pixel to screen. Can't say pen to paper, can I? And that's out too. So I got quite a few there. Now, in regard to what we're both up to over the next sort of couple of weeks, we will both be at IFA. The latter half of this week at some point. I'm not entirely sure when we're going to turn up, but we'll both be at IFA. And then probably, in fact, I think the next episode will probably mostly be about this, will be at Startup Night the week after. True. In fact, I think we'll probably make the majority of the next kind of episode with the two of us about that, actually.
Sure. We could probably do some live interviews while we're there.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Until the next time, I have been Chris on @ChrisChinch.
And I've been Kate on Kate with a C _LAW Lawrence.
With a W.
And there's an ash at the start of that. I think you can work it out, right?
And if you enjoy the podcast, please go to gregariousmammal.com/podcast to find previous episodes and show notes. And please go to gregariousmammal.com/support to buy any lovely merchandise. We have stickers available. We will tell you in the next episode how to get your hands on those because we're going to plan a little something around them, but I haven't quite got round to getting that ready yet. So you will have some stickers from us pretty soon. But yeah, and vote us on any podcasting platforms that you use, and we will speak to you all next time. See you for now.
Bye-bye.